All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started with our new unit. So a couple things just to share with us. In Classroom, posted the slides. That's typically where I'm going to be going over the material or lecture anyway. And then I also posted the Quizlet. As far as the Quizlet is concerned, the current deadline I have May 19th. That is next Friday. This is a full-length unit. There will be obviously a Quizlet. There will be a review as far as a Kahoot. There will be a test, full 50 questions. So I expect around that time, as I mentioned in my post here, I mentioned how this unit is strictly for the non-seniors. For the seniors, the urinary system and the urinary quiz that we already took was going to be the last assignment for them. And again, I'm closing my grades for the seniors on May 12th. So just be prepared for that. If you happen to owe me anything, if you're all caught up, if everything's good to go and you're a senior and that means you'll be graduating, then you're all set. No worries. So one thing to mention before we do get started with this stuff, so let's just load it up a little bit. As far as the Quizlet, the big thing to take note here, there are only 42 terms, so it's not as lengthy as some of the other units. It is definitely like about middle of the pack as far as lengthiness is concerned. But there are two diagrams on this test. Similar to the census test, when we had multiple diagrams, such as we had to understand the eye and the ear. This is very similar. The only problem is with Quizlet, as I mentioned previously, unfortunately, it doesn't let me upload multiple diagrams, at least from what I've tried. So because of that, there is no diagram in the Quizlet. But on the test, and I'll mention this when I'm reviewing it, and I'll make sure to hit this as many times as possible. But on the test, we will need to know both the male and female reproductive structures. So that is something that we do need to be a little bit more prepared for. So we'll go over that. We'll make sure everything's good. But the vocab is here to make sure we're all set. So no worries there. All right, so let's go ahead and get started as far as reproductive system is concerned. So the reproductive system, it is the last unit of the course. Traditionally speaking, when we have a final exam, because this school year we don't have a final exam, traditionally speaking, this unit is taught after the seniors leave, after the seniors have taken their final exam, which would have been around now. And the reason for that is the county, for some reason, doesn't require this material as far as on their expectations on what you're going to see on the final. So this stuff sort of gets pushed to the side. Now, my belief is if you're taking a course, general anatomy and physiology, especially for high school level, the best intention should be to cover every single body system, at least to the basics, to give you a general understanding of what each body system does. And then, of course, in the future, if you want to go more in depth with this stuff and specific systems as you progress possibly into a medical field, then yeah, go for it. Do what you need to do. But it doesn't feel right to just ignore an entire body system that is still necessary for our body's function, especially with how it plays together with other body systems. As we've learned, most of our body systems are not just isolated. They work together with all these other body systems to keep our species, to keep our organism functional. So what are the goals of the reproductive system for this unit? Identify and describe the anatomy and physiology of the male and female reproductive system. So that's pretty straightforward, right? The literal anatomical structures found in both men and women, and also what they are involved with, what their jobs are. And then describe the process of human development. This is something that a lot of people, especially at high school age, obviously have a general understanding, but some of it might not be as understood. This is also a unit that more usually when we're in a classroom setting, I also treat as a pseudo sex ed, because I have noticed in the years that I've been teaching that unfortunately a lot of people get misinformation. It's unfortunate that it's so easy for misinformation to travel around, and I'm sure a lot of us have become very well aware of that. But even something misinformation involving sex can be life-altering if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not prepared. So that is something that I do kind of touch upon. Like I said, in a classroom setting, it's usually a little bit more natural to have this type of back and forth conversation. But in this version of our lecturing, I'll do my best just to kind of touch upon some subjects that I think are necessary to discuss. So to start things off, when it comes down to the reproductive system, there are some primary organs that we need to know. The primary sex organs are called gonads. I mentioned this back in endocrine system. I said that, I said that the gonads are these sex organs. Now, the problem is, for some reason, I've always noticed this myself, gonad tends to be a male connotative term. It's not. It's sex organs for men or women. So, for instance, the gonads are specific depending on the sex of the individual. So, in men, it will be the gonads in men will be the testes, whereas the gonads in women will be the ovaries. The gonads, their whole job is to produce gametes. That's a nice word to pay attention to. I'm just going to underline that for us real quick, but that's definitely going to be a key vocab term for this unit. So gametes are considered our sex cells. They secrete hormones, which we learned all about hormones back in endocrine system, so not new there. Now, with regards to the gametes, though, the biggest thing to comprehend, and we'll talk more about that later in this unit, is that they're considered haploid. This is pure biology review. You should have learned what diploid cells and haploid cells are, but to give you a basic summary, diploid cells are cells that have a full set of chromosomes, whereas a haploid cell is going to have half the set of chromosomes. Why would we want a set of cells that have half the set of chromosomes? Well, simply put, the purpose of these gametes is to fuse with the other set of gametes to form new life. That's literally it. So you need that balance. You need that 1 + 1 = 2 type formula in this situation. So what are the male gametes? Well, the male gametes are going to be the sperm. Sperm have a very interesting anatomy and physiology overall. For sperm, they start to be made at puberty, as far as in boys, and then they will be made till the day a man dies. However, with the eggs, the ova, all of the eggs are made in women during the developmental stages in the womb. So millions of eggs are made way, way, way before a woman is ever born, and she will release eggs from puberty all the way until menopause, which we'll get into that as well in this unit. All right. So here we get to see the anatomical structures of the male reproductive system. Remember I was mentioning how in the Quizlet it doesn't show a diagram. Expect a diagram very similar to this on the test. Now, not everything here we need to know. Quite a number of structures here we do need to be aware of. So I'm just going to do a little bit of underlining just to make sure we're comfortable with, hey, make sure we're good with these structures. So I'm going to start off on the right-hand side. Sometimes you'll refer to this as the scrotal sac, but the scrotum is perfectly fine here. The scrotum is just going to be what contains the testes. It's outside of the body, and there's a reason why this has to be outside of the body, as we'll learn as we progress. Then we have the male gonads, which we just mentioned, are going to be the testes. The testes, again, are going to be the center for creating the male sex cell, or sperm in this case. We have the epididymis. It's this comma-shaped structure. Oops, sorry about that. It's this comma-shaped structure that is going to be right on top of the testes. It kind of sits on top of it. Again, plays a major role for the male reproductive system, which we'll learn. Moving on up, closer towards the rectum area of the body, so more towards the lower quadrants, we have what's called the bulbourethral gland. This is a gland specific to men. Only men have this. We obviously don't need to worry about rectum because it's not a reproductive organ. That was a digestive organ, but it's showing it to us so we see perspective as far as where these parts of the body are in men. Then we have the urethra. We did talk about the urethra in our last unit because the urethra is that tube that carries urine out from the bladder. Now, the key thing here, as we learned back in urinary system, is that in men, it doesn't just carry urine. In men, it can also carry sperm and semen. And again, there's a process into which how this happens, but we do need to be aware of the urethra. Then we have this large orange-colored gland that we see here, and that's going to be the prostate gland. The prostate gland is, once again, a gland specific to men. Only men have this. It is a very, very important gland. In fact, it is so important that typically post 45 to 50, or so when you go for your general checkups, if you are going, that is. It's expected for men to start getting prostate exams because this gland can become very sensitive to infection, very sensitive to possibly even cancer as well. So you really want to make sure that this gland is being treated the right way. Right next to the prostate gland, we have this tiny tube structure called the seminal vesicle. So the seminal vesicle, again, plays a very important role with regards to the health of semen, which is the fluid that sperm travels in. Moving on to the left-hand side, we have the ejaculatory duct. Try to underline that as best as I can. We also see the urethra again, but if you notice, I'm not going to underline it twice. It's basically just saying that the urethra can be named differently based off the region. So for instance, when the urethra is in the prostate, we call that the prostatic urethra. Whereas when the urethra is exiting the prostate, we call that the membranous. And then you can even call the urethra inside the penis the penile urethra. So there's different names. We don't have to worry about that. I'm perfectly fine with you just knowing this whole tube is called the urethra. Next, we have the urinary bladder. We learned that in urinary system. It is not a reproductive organ, so we're good. We don't have to worry about that. But we can see where the bladder sits on top of the prostate. Again, it's lower to the body, close to the groin region. Next, we don't have to worry about this, but you do have a bone found near your groin region. It's called the pubis. That bone is obviously, like any other bone, something that can be fractured and damaged, so you'd have to be careful with that. Next, we have the ductus deferens. The ductus deferens. So the ductus deferens is going to be a long tube that comes from the epididymis all the way to the prostate gland, approximately. We'll learn more about that in our following videos. And then finally, all of this down here, I'm just going to kind of grab all that together. All of that down there, there are specific parts of the penis that can be specifically learned, such as, for instance, the erectile tissue, which is tissue of the penis that actually has blood flow, the shaft, spongy urethra, glands, the prepuce. All this stuff can be specifically discussed. I am perfectly fine with just saying, all right, well, all of this together, we're just going to refer to that as the penis, the male genitalia. And that's pretty much it. Overall, like I said, quite a number of structures here that we do need to be aware of and comfortable with, but not everything. So I would be practicing something like this for a future, especially for our test, which will be some point next week, if not the week after, depending on how we're pacing. But for now, this is a good place to stop when it comes down to male reproductive. We're going to continue learning about every one of these structures that I underlined and discussed, and then we'll from there transition to female reproductive system and move on from there. All right, so thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a good one.